Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. And how is everyone doing? I hope everyone is good. So let's start with our first video that I'm going to post today, which is about setting up a basic React application with GraphQL API connection. Okay, so this is my React. This is my empty folder that I'm just gonna go and drop into my VS Code, and we will open the VS Code. Now let's simply create a basic React application. So I'm gonna use Vite, right? And I think the command for Vite is let's go to it's React. Oh, sorry, my bad. It's npm create free at latest. Okay, in my terminal, I'm just gonna copy this command and I'm gonna run this. So what you can do is you can provide a name to your project, but I don't want to do that because it will create a new folder inside this folder. So I'm just gonna provide a dot, which means it's gonna install all the dependencies in this folder. Okay, so now it's asking me to select the framework. It's very easy stuff. So let's do React, and I only want JavaScript. So let's do npm install. So basically, it's gonna install all the node dependencies, and the node modules folder will be there now. Um, and then we can run npm run dev. Okay, so now let's copy this and paste it here. So this is basic React application bootstrapped from Vite. Okay, now let's build the UI that we want to show, and this is only just going to have very basic list and um, two buttons. I think it will be next and previous buttons, not much. And we will integrate the GraphQL API, and then we will see how to fetch and show the data on the screen. Okay, so let's go to source and let's go to app.jsx. Um, I think I'm gonna keep. Okay, I'm gonna remove everything from here. Okay, and I'm gonna put a div. So let's put a div, and inside let's put a h1 list of items. So basically, okay, let's remove this. It's just boilerplate code, and now I'm just gonna say list items. So let's do that, and after that, let's go to okay. So list items. Okay, now I think okay. So we have list items. So I just basically you will get this CSS files in the GitHub repo, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, now let's make a div with class name item, and then just put one h2 there and item number 1. Okay, and now let's take this class, go to app.css, and let's give it a height of 50 pixels and background color of white, padding of 2 rem. This is nothing. I just want this kind of styling. Okay, and let's go to VS Code and then this color. Okay, so this is what I have. Okay, now what I want to do, I want to wrap this div with another div, item container. Let's move this. So now I have wrapped this div with item container. Let's take this and we'll add display flex direction column, and the gap will be 1 rem. So gap is basically gonna make rem spaced, and width is 100%. Okay, and let's duplicate this for now because we don't have the API yet. So let's see how it looks. Let me remove the height. Okay, okay, all right. Yes. So let's add a class in here, wrapper, and let's delete this. And let's do it display flex. Flex justify content center. I think that would be enough because it will bring. Okay, I think I need flex direction column. Yes, I need. Okay, and then if I do that, then I will need align item center because then it will bring it back to center. But I need this width 100% over here, and I need padding 0 here, border, sorry, box sizing, border box. Okay, okay, so we have this, and so just one thing that I want to do here is this, and okay, let me just copy this. Okay, so this is the UI. So please don't worry about the CSS. This is not CSS focused tutorial. You can get the CSS file in the GitHub repo. We will search for SWA Star Wars API GraphQL, and then this is the link that you will also get in the description that you can click on, and this will be the API that we are going to use. So this is a Apollo client. This is the interface that is provided by the Apollo client and the API. So when we come to this link, we click on Run in Explorer, and now we will be able to request or make requests to the endpoints that are available from this API. Okay, so now let's first set up the front end for connecting to the API, and for that you search for apollographql.com, that you will also now this is the link. We will click on Apollo client, and this is where it will come up, and then we, basically the main dependencies that we need to install is this. So let's go to your VS Code and bring back the terminal. We do this. Now we will install Apollo client, which is a library and which is going we are going to use on the front end to connect to the API. And GraphQL is the library that we are going to use to make help us use the GraphQL API structures in the front end. So now let's go there, and so they have like a full-on tutorial that if you want, you guys can go ahead and go through the documentation, but we're just gonna go in our main .jsx, sorry, app.jsx, or we can use main.jsx as well. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna copy this and we're gonna paste it here. Now let's import this from Apollo client and in-memory cache from Apollo client as well. Now, what is this Apollo client? So this is a class instance that we will get from the Apollo client library that will help us define the URL and the API endpoint configuration. So our app knows where to look uh, for the when we make an API call. Now, what is this in-memory cache? So basically, GraphQL and Apollo client provides the caching on the front end by default. Okay, so we don't have to go through all the caching process. It does it by default, but we have to define this to tell the Apollo client or our front end that we are gonna use caching. Okay, now let's copy these imports. Okay, I'm just gonna replace this line with that. Uh, okay, now there is a Apollo provider. Okay, so what the only thing we need to do is we'll say Apollo provider, and then we're gonna move our app inside it. So this Apollo provider is a component provided from Apollo client that wraps our application, and then we just need to provide a client, which is the client we just created. Now, what is happening? So basically, our app is wrapped with a provider component, and our provider component is accepting a client prop. Now, our whole application, anywhere in that component, knows that we are gonna call this API. Basically, okay, sorry, my bad. This URL is incorrect. I have to go to this and let's go back and let's copy this URL and then paste it here. Okay, so basically our whole application now is wrapped with Apollo provider component that accepts a client prop, and this client prop is basically a configuration or a options object that contains this information. The information is that the URL for the API that whatever you have or you created or you are using, and this caching setting. So we this is kind of mandatory. If we don't do this, we will get an error. So they now what's our next step? Now we will have to write a query. So there are many ways that you can write query. Just go here. Okay, now let's click on all films and we'll just say total count. On from films, so basically what GraphQL lets you do is that you can choose what data you want from the API. You need not have to call the all of that information and get the in the response and then filter out whatever you want to show on the front end, right? If you do the REST API, that's what we do. We call the API, we get everything, and then we filter out or show only what we need. But in this GraphQL API structure, we only call what we need. Okay, so let's see. I want the ID, I want the release date, I want the title, I want the director created, edited. Okay, and the ID. Okay, if you can get access to any other things if you like. And now let's go to edges. We don't have anything for that. We need the total count. Okay, now let's copy this. Now let's go back to VS Code. And now what we can do, basically what I like to do is I like to create a new file with name queries.ts, and then I'll just export const get all films. Okay, and I will have to write GQL. Now, what is this? I'm just going to explain. So basically, this is a function that is being provided by Apollo client, but we don't call this with parentheses. We call this with these weird syntax with backticks. Okay. I'm not really sure why it did that instead of just using it as a function, but this basically is a function, and we are passing this information to this function that it will know that this is the information that we are asking from the API. So I just copy whatever I want from the API and I just select it, and then I copied it from here, and then I pasted it after the first backtick, and this is the last closing backtick. Okay, and why did I write like this? It's basically industry convention to write the query names with all caps, and most of the time we will try to make this name as similar as the API name. So API query, and what is query? Query is basically then the name that the name says, calling the API and getting the query from they get querying the information from the database. Okay, now we have the query, we have the provider, we have the client, our application is wrapped. Now, how do we call the API? So there are few ways that you can call the API. Okay, so the first one is use query hook that we get from the a follow client. Okay. Now, what is this use query hook? So basically, what use query hook will do is, as soon as your component is rendered, it will be called right away. It does not wait for anything. Basically, as soon as your component gets on the screen or gets mounted, it will call the use query hook will call the API and get whatever the information that you want. And this use query returns us a object. Okay. Now this object will contain a data object. Okay. This is the data that you get back. A loading state. So it automatically tracks and manages the loading state for you. So you don't have to manage a separate state for loading. You can just use this one, and an error state. Okay. So now let's also log our data. Okay. Before that, let's console log loading. Okay. And let's see what happens when we renders our component. And let's also console log error. Okay. First parameter that goes to the use query is the query name. So basically, I'm just importing the query that I defined here. As you see here, the get all fields is the one that is being imported here and is passed. Okay. Now let's refresh again. Now you see loading is true, data is undefined, error is undefined, and after it fetches all the data, the loading is false, there is some data, and error is still undefined because there was no error. Okay, so we have all films and total count and all this. So we have 6 films by default. Okay, now let's do something. What we will do is we will, instead of doing all this, we'll say data and data. So basically this is data object, and inside we have all films object. So we'll say data dot all films, and then we will check if data dot all films, then inside here we have films array. Now then we'll check if the films array has a length greater than 0, then we will render a div with class name item, and then inside we have to do data dot all films and films map. Let's name it single film, and then return this div. Okay. Now this film will contain our fill information. So what is that information? So basically whatever we requested from the API. So let's use the title. Okay. Okay. Now if we go to the UI, we see the same information that we see in the films. We have the title, A New Hope, and all of this information. So like Revenge of the Attack of the Clones, the Phantom Menace, the Return of the Jedi, and the first one is A New Hope. Okay, and I think we have a warning. Okay, let's add the key here, which is film.id. Okay, so if I refresh now, we don't see that error. Okay, so we have this information. Now, as you see, as soon as my, let's open that tab. So, as you see, if I refresh, as soon as my component renders, the first request is made to the API right away, and it just returns me the data. Okay, so that's how the use query hook works. Now, let's go to the API and see if there are any arguments that we can pass. So, okay, so basically we can pass first and last. So there are, if we don't pass anything, it will return all of the films, and it says total count is 6. Okay, so let's say I want only the first one. So what we will have to do, I will have to first update my query in my front end to look like this, where we are now passing this and this, which is the arguments that we pass to our API that say, okay, what should be returned. And if I say I only want the first one, and it only returned me the first one, and I can say 2. Now it doesn't mean the second one. Actually, it means that I only want 2 out of 6. And I still get the total count, which is good because then I will know that if there are more, so I can call for more API. calls. Okay, so let's do this. Let's copy this now and put more queries, and then just replace this with the updated query where we have the argument. Okay, now how do we pass those arguments to the API? So this use query hook will accept a second object, which will contain variables, and then that will also be an object. So now we will just see whatever is here. We'll go here, and then let's say one. Now, if I go back to my UI, I only see one video. Okay. Now let's do one thing. Let's add a button here. See more, and let's create a function and see more. Again. So we will say if data dot all films dot total count. Okay, sorry. So before that, I think we should have a use state. Okay, so we will say limit and then set limit, and then we will use the use state. Default will be one, and now instead of passing one here, I will pass limit. Okay, now I will say if the total counter we are getting from the backend is less than limit, then set limit, and then I'm gonna say previous limit plus one, else set limit back to one. Now I'll say on click use handle mode. Okay, so whenever I click on this button, our state for limit is changed. Now let's also console log the limit so we can see if it's changing or not. And for now, let's comment this part out so we will be able to see the. If I click on see more, oh, actually, let me just uncomment this. Okay, sorry, not this one. So we will be able to see the limit getting increased. So if I click on see more, you see it's changing. Now I have two. And my API actually got called again. Now I have two because I am sending limit. Okay, yes. Okay, so if I click on three, four, five, six. Now I already have the six items. If I call the API again, it's not gonna increase, but this is a bad user experience. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna uncomment these conditions. Okay. So what will happen if my limit is less than the total count, then only will I be increasing the limit. Otherwise, I will setting it back to one. Okay, now let's refresh again. Say, let me just clear my lot of blocks. If I say see more. Oh, actually, it's not total underscore count. It's total count. Okay, let me refresh again. Okay, now say see more. Didn't call the API. Why? Total count. Oh, sorry, it's not less than greater than. Okay, do it again. Nothing I see the API is made. API call is being made. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now I have the 6. Actually, I have to switch my condition. I have to check if limit is less than data or all films to count. Then change the limit and okay. So if I do a refresh, I see new hope. I can see more. There's 2 items, 3 items, 4, 5, 6. Now if I click on see more again, it will set the limit back to 1, but it didn't call the API. If we see, it didn't call the API. And yet it's not calling the API because by default, it's always going to check the cache if we don't specify the fetch policy. So what is the fetch policy? Basically, if we don't say what to do on the API calls, right? It's by default. If we made this API call already, let's say with the 5 items, we have API call made already. Until we refresh, it's not going to call the API. This is so great because All of these API calls were made only one, and I can just use that information again and again. See, I'm not making any API calls. And on the last one, it just changed back. Okay. Now let me just update this button tag. So I'm gonna say if data dot all firms dot total count is equal to limit, then say change to one else see more. I'm just doing it for no reason. It's just it looks nice. If we refresh now, we will see now the API call is made. So 3, 4, 5, and as soon as I click on this one, the button text is now changed to 1, and if I click on this, we are back with that same scenario where we are not calling the API, but we are able to see the new data. Okay, so that's why we used this caching thing, because in memory cache, that is a class that it comes from the Apollo client that helps us cache the data in the front end, so we don't have to call the API again and again. But if you still want to call the API again and again, then you should pass an extra block, which is fetch policy. Cache only is the default, but it's always gonna check the cache. Okay, so it's not gonna call the net, it's not gonna call the server after once the call is made. The network only will always call the API. So let's use the network only. And now let's refresh for once. Now this time it is gonna call the net server, right? But what was happening before, when we click on this, there was no API call being made. But this time it will be. So you see, we call the API again and again. So now it depends on your use case. If you want to add this block, then you should add if your data relies on the new data from the server. But if it doesn't, then if it's not very oftenly changing data, then you should keep it to by default to the um to the cache only default. So basically it helps us make less API calls. Okay, so this is very basic example of how to set up the Apollo client and how to set up the React with the Apollo client and use the GraphQL APIs. So basically what you can do is you can just call this hook anywhere in a component. It doesn't have to be in just app component, because we already wrapped our whole application with this provider component. So it's using the React context behind the scenes to give us access to these hooks and these variables anywhere in the application. And you can define anything in any URL that you have in this one, and you can provide that client here. Okay, and once you do that, your application will have access to call this API using this use query hook. And if you have any arguments or variables, and you will be able to do them. And more videos like this and also advanced topics are coming soon as we move forward in the topics. I'm really excited to post all about those topics, and they're really interesting. So please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my videos. Okay, and have a good one, guys. See you in the next video.